Can a single word erase the distance between you and the divine? For most people, words are tools of communication, sounds shaped by breath and meaning. But in Yunus Emre's philosophy, a word is far more than speech. It is an instrument of transformation. Modern thought tends to treat distance as a physical measurement, the space between 2 points, or 2 separate beings. In spiritual psychology, however, distance refers to a state of perception, the felt separation between consciousness and reality, between the self and the source of its being. Yunus Emre proposed that this distance is not real, only perceived, and that perception can be dissolved through a single word, not a magical formula, but a realignment of awareness. His word is not recited to reach the divine. It is realized to remember that the divine was never absent. The question that guides our inquiry is simple but profound. What is this word, and how can language itself dissolve separation between self and the real? Modern humanity lives in a paradox of hyperconnection and inner isolation. We can speak instantly across the planet, yet feel increasingly detached from ourselves and others. Psychologists describe this as a fragmented self-model, a mind distributed across competing roles, tasks, and digital environments. Our attention is fragmented, our identities scattered. Neuroscience connects this fragmentation to overactivity in the default mode network, the system responsible for constructing our sense of I. When this network dominates, the mind becomes trapped in constant self-referencing, narrating, comparing, and judging, reinforcing the illusion of a separate self. Language amplifies this condition. Words become instruments of labeling, categorizing, and dividing. We describe rather than experience. We analyze rather than participate. Each label creates a small wall between the observer and the observed, between meaning and being. Communication, in quantity, has never been greater. Yet communion, the meeting of consciousness with consciousness, has rarely been weaker. Yunus Emre's question remains urgent. Can words once again become bridges instead of barriers? Can speech recover its unifying power? To answer that, we turn to Yunus Emre, the 13th century Anatolian mystic who brought the deepest metaphysics of Sufism into the language of ordinary people, living in a period of both political upheaval and intellectual brilliance. Emre translated the abstract teachings of earlier Sufis into experiential insight. His poems were not emotional outpourings. They were philosophical experiments in language designed to show that words can awaken, not just describe. For Emre, the word is not sound. It is being itself in articulation. To speak truly is to manifest truth, not merely to refer to it. This idea traces back to the Quranic notion of kalima, the creative word by which existence unfolds, encapsulated in the command be, and it is. Yunus Emre's contribution was to internalize this cosmology. Every human, he said, bears within them the capacity to articulate being. The ancient way is the way of presence through speech, to speak from a state of coherence where thought, emotion, and intention align. The question becomes not what we say, but from where we speak. If the divine creates through the word, can human awareness uncreate its own separation through conscious speech? Emre's first principle is that a word is not simply linguistic, it is vibrational consciousness. When aligned with truth, it harmonizes the self with reality. In contemporary neuroscience, sound and language are known to shape neural oscillations. Practices like Dika, rhythmic remembrance, synchronize activity across brain regions and quiet the default mode network. leading to experiences of unity and transcendence. Psychologists call this a self-transcendent state, where boundaries between self and world soften in this light. Emre's word functions like a cognitive tuning fork when uttered with awareness and meaning. It entrains the nervous system into coherence. The effect is not mystical in the supernatural sense. It is neurological and existential at once. Modern self-help movements often promote affirmations or mantras, but Emre's insight goes deeper. Sound alone is inert, unless integrated with understanding and sincerity. The heart recognizes truth through resonance, not logic alone. The word that erases distance, therefore, is not external speech, but an internal resonance that reorganizes perception. The question is not what word should I say, but what consciousness speaks through me when I speak. Emre's second insight redefines the act of speaking. For him, speech is not an expression of personality, it is an emanation of presence. He distinguishes two modes of language. First, egoic speech, reactive, defensive, designed to affirm or protect identity. Second, heart speech, responsive, grounded, spoken from awareness rather than self-image. In psychology, this mirrors mindful communication, speech that arises after attention has stabilized. Neuroscientific studies show that mindful speech lowers cortisol levels, enhances empathy circuits, and improves emotion regulation. For Emre, authentic speech is when the inner and outer correspond, when language reflects, rather than masks, one's state of being. The word that erases distance is spoken from unity. It does not claim ownership, nor seek validation. In Sufi terminology, this sincerity is ikhlas, purity of intention where self and act converge. When the self stops performing, language becomes transparent. It no longer separates speaker and listener. It allows meaning to pass through unobstructed. In modern terms, Emre anticipates non-dual communication, speech where awareness itself becomes the speaker. All of Emre's philosophy rests on one emotional foundation: love. Without love, he says, speech is noise. But in his metaphysics, love is not a fleeting emotion. It is the underlying structure of reality, the energy that binds being to being. To speak from love is to speak from the recognition of shared existence. Modern, effective neuroscience reveals a similar principle. Compassion activates brain networks associated with integration and attunement, enhancing our capacity to feel connected and understood. This neurological coherence mirrors Emre's description of the heart unified through love. Words born of intellect alone divide because intellect operates by distinction. Words born of love unite because love perceives continuity. Emre's line, "If you have no love, your words are but noise," expresses not sentiment, but ontology. Love reorganizes perception, turning language from representation into recognition. To speak from love is to dissolve the collusion of separation. If every word carried the vibration of inclusion rather than exclusion, communication would cease to be transactional and become transformational. Yet Emre adds a paradox: to speak truly, one must first be silent. In his poetry, he contrasts many words with the one word. The more we speak from ego, the more we multiply distance. Silence, by contrast, is the womb of meaning, the pre-verbal stillness from which authentic language emerges. Contemplative neuroscience supports this. Periods of deliberate silence reorganize brain networks, lower stress, and increase integrative activity between cognitive and emotional centers. In silence, attention resets. For Emre, silence is not absence, but origin. Speech without silence becomes mechanical, repetition without depth. Silence without speech becomes inert, potential without expression. The ideal state is the balance, silence that speaks through words. In modern terms, this is a dynamic system of self-regulation, oscillation between verbalization and stillness that maintains psychological coherence. True speech, therefore, is not noise produced by thought, but meaning expressed by silence. At the deepest level, Emre's teaching is ontological, about the nature of being itself. In Sufi metaphysics, the word participates in the same creative principle as the divine command be, and it is. Speech, when true, mirrors creation. To misuse words is to distort reality. To use them truthfully is to align with divine articulation. This principle resonates with cognitive science. Language structures thought. Thought shapes perception, and perception defines reality. Change the structure of speech, and you literally alter the architecture of experience. Thus, Emre's word that erases distance is not mystical poetry but a cognitive reorientation, a restructuring of how consciousness relates to language. Speech becomes not a bridge between two separate selves, but the field in which unity reveals itself. Words no longer point to truth. They participate in it. The rational insight here is subtle but revolutionary. The word that erases distance is not spoken to describe oneness. It manifests oneness in the very act of being spoken. To translate Emre's insight into modern practice, consider 4 steps, each supported by psychology and neuroscience. Before speaking, pause. Observe the impulse behind your words. Are they emerging from defense, anxiety, or awareness? This moment of metacognition interrupts automatic speech and reactivates the prefrontal cortex, the center of conscious regulation. Language shapes thought. Choosing inclusive words like we, together, or presence reduces perceived social distance. Cognitive linguistics confirms that linguistic framing alters empathy and cooperation. Ensure alignment between tone, emotion, and meaning. Coherence between affect and language strengthens trust and psychological congruence. Measurable in synchronized neural patterns during conversation. Build intervals of silence in dialogue and reflection. This resets attentional rhythms and allows the nervous system to stabilize. Silence restores coherence. Speech then extends it outward. Together, these practices transform speech from performance into awareness. Communication becomes an extension of being, not an escape from it. Yunus Emre's word that erases distance reveals a profound psychological and spiritual truth. Conscious language dissolves the illusion of separation when words arise from presence. Aligned with love and rooted in silence, they cease to be symbols and become acts of recognition. The distance between self and divine, between one mind and another, collapses not through mystical transport but through the reorganization of awareness. The separation we feel from reality is linguistic, constructed by divided attention and unconscious articulation.